Hello, I am Aviva Lee, reporting for Jerusalem News Live. Today is the 2nd of March, 2009. Yesterday morning, while browsing WebProNews, I came across a very interesting headline. The headline read, and I quote, "House says bloggers don't count as journalists," end quote. Of course, you understand why this headline caught my attention. It seems that whilst the economy in the United States of America slides right on down the pike straight into Hades, that the newly elected federal legislature has decided that new legislation is needed to legally define who is a journalist and who is not. I, for one, am not surprised at this proposed legislation, but that's another story entirely. Mr. Jason Lee Miller, senior editor at WebProNews, wrote a very good editorial about the proposed legislation. I encourage you to go online and take a look at the remarks of Mr. Miller, especially if you are an American who cherishes your freedoms guaranteed by those two austere documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America. I felt that Mr. Miller's editorial, however, could be broadened just a bit to emphasize the absurdity and the danger of that proposed legislation. For those of you who do not have time for 2 clicks at this moment, my opinion went as follows, and I quote, "There are a few other logical conclusions for consideration if this legislation is passed. Number 1, a paid journalist who writes a book and earns more money by writing for publications other than a news outlet would, by the language proposed, no longer be a journalist, hence not entitled to the freedom of the press. Number 2, to say that a volunteer, independent, or freelance journalist contributing copy to bona fide sources, even underground outlets, is not a real journalist is like saying Dr. Albert Schweitzer was not a real physician because he volunteered his services. Logically, the language would apply to any other profession, hence its absurdity is personified ad infinitum. Number 3, the absurdity of the logical conclusion would be best illustrated by using the House of Representatives itself as the prime end example. If in the process of the election an independently wealthy person were elected and wished to volunteer and not be paid a salary, then under the language which is proposed by the House of Representatives, that particular elected official would not be defined as a member of their own body. Hence, their vote would not be valid. This kind of thinking is not humorous. It is in fact very insidious and sinister. This kind of thinking stems from a philosophy that the masses should be herded like cattle because they do not have an Ivy League diploma on their walls and therefore are incompetent to make intelligent decisions for themselves. Furthermore, when one examines the terminology which is used to define new technology which journalists use in order to get their story out, one discovers that there is an industry bias, propagated, no doubt, by the big media outlets which wish to protect their territory against the independent journalist. This is the reason the media industry has fought to keep independent news services which do not rely on AP, FP, or Reuters feed, who publish online via MP3 or filmmaker formats defined as a non-credible source, unless, of course, it serves their own purposes." End quote. And to underscore the seriousness of this proposed legislation, and what it actually seeks to accomplish, one need only ask where the legislation originated, which lobbyists promoted its authorship, and who is sponsoring the bill. When I attend press conferences here in Israel, I rarely hesitate to ask what others define as tough questions. Most of the time, when the press conference is concluded, one of my colleagues will approach me in private and whisper, "Aviva, thank you so much for asking that question. I could never ask it and be published." This comment in and of itself bears out the reality of working for a large media company whose purpose is to promote the owner's ideology, if not propagandize, rather than promote and report the facts. I am an American living in Israel. I'm a patriot. I cherish my American freedoms. However, the letters I send to my elected officials about this legislation will not have the same impact as those of every American in America. I urge you each to contact your newly elected federal legislators who ran and won on the rhetoric of change and demand that this proposed legislation be deep-sixed for eternity. I'm Aviva Lee, reporting for Jerusalem News Live. Let's close this segment with those 4 important questions which still beg for an answer. How many moderate Muslims are there in the Gaza Strip? How many moderate Muslims would it take to overthrow Hamas? Where is Corporal Gilad Shalit? And how many moderate Muslims would it take to set Corporal Shalit free? Thank you, and Shalom. May the Almighty help this present inhabited world.